Modern world, everything about it is unbiological. I mean, from the way that we work to the way that we have children to the way that we raise those children. I mean, most people are so disconnected, dysregulated. Leukemia is a healing phase symptom. That person had a self-devaluation conflict and they lost bone tissue. They were losing blood cells. They were in an anemic state during the conflict active phase. And then during the healing phase, oh, your white blood cells are really, really high. And they say, oh, this is scary. This is bad. But if someone who knows this math, they'd say, congratulations, you've resolved a self-devaluation conflict. That's how profound this knowledge is, that if you don't know it, and truly we are all, every person that doesn't know this is at a huge liability, because you're one symptom away from, Googling or going to the doctor and having a test and then them telling you something so terrifying. And then you get into this vicious cycle, downward spiral of fear and more diagnosis and more fear. And it's like, it's no wonder that we're in the health situation we're in, because everyone is, they don't understand how their body works.
Dr. Melissa Self, thank you so much for coming on to the Good Demand podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm wonderful, having a great day.
Oh, awesome. So I got introduced to, German New Medicine through you, which is an amazing honor to actually talk to you about this yourself. I saw a keynote speak of you in Music and Sky Festival, which was amazing. And you introduced this idea of how trauma, like let's say for cancer, that you had the very specific example of cancer. If someone had cancer and they were to find out about having cancer, and they took that upon themselves in a negative way, it'll create like a negative feedback loop, causing more dysfunction and causing more trauma to the person. And you said something completely profound that I've never heard before, which was if we're able to change our perspective on what the body is actually doing, then we'll have a better segue into healing ourselves. And, I study psychology, I got my degree in psychology, and I've always been very, very fascinated on like the placebo effects and just how the mind actually has control over the actual physical. And so when I heard you say this, I was just like, whoa, I was like taken back. And as I looked into German New Medicine a little bit more, what it seems like to me, and I'm going to let you explain it because you're the expert here, is that when we have traumas in our psyche, they make changes for adaptation in the body. Now, that's just my understanding. And of course, the adaptations can be seen as good or bad depending on who's looking. Is that kind of what German New Medicine is?
Yeah, you got it. It's a discovery of a German medical doctor who had a tragedy that he experienced. He lost his son in this crazy freak accident situation. There's actually a documentary on Netflix if you haven't checked it out. It's called The King Who Never Was. It's not about Dr. Hamer, but it's about his son and this dramatic situation surrounding him getting shot by the Crown Prince of Italy. And it's just a wild story. Dr. Hamer is only briefly mentioned, and they just kind of say, oh yeah, he's got crazy cancer theories. But after I know, so they obviously can't come out and explain and unpack all of this. Otherwise, everyone would not already know about it.
Sure.
So after his loss of his son, he developed testicular cancer, and he had an intuitive knowing that this was related to the loss of his son. And then he worked in an oncology unit and had access to lots of cancer patients, lots of files. And he started noticing a theme that every time a person had a specific type of cancer, like a testicular cancer, they always had a loss. Every woman who had a cervical cancer had some type of sexual frustration type of situation she was dealing with. Every woman with glandular breast cancer had a worry. Everyone with lung cancer had a death fright. And so this theme, this pattern started to develop where he's like, okay, something is happening to these people and they are developing cancer. And then he looked in the brain, he looked at CT brain scans and he saw a pattern. He saw that there's a specific location correlated to every specific type of cancer, which correlates to every specific type of traumatic life event. And so he started to put these pieces together. And as he's like figuring this all out, his son is coming to him in dreams saying, yes, you're on the right track. You're figuring it out. There's still more pieces. And so, Dr. Hamer, as he's realizing, have I just been given this vision about how the body develops cancer. And he said he was just weak in the knees as he's realizing this, but he went on to map out every tissue. So I don't know, for those listening, there's a huge map of every tissue in the body, and every tissue has a specific purpose. It derives from a specific tissue origin. It's correlated to a specific area in the brain, and it's correlated to a specific life event, an experience that causes your tissues to adapt. And so that's like the big thing, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
We used to think that when the body develops a lump or bump, a cancer, that something is gone wrong, there's a mistake that's happening. But what Dr. Hamer discovered is that it's actually a meaningful, intentional adaptation on behalf of the body to improve your ability to survive and to reproduce. So Dr. Hamer, he lost his son. Just think about how much natural basic sense this makes. If you lose a child and you have this shock of loss of your offspring, and he then developed testicular cancer, the cancer isn't something that's a mistake. It's actually nature's way of enhancing his ability to produce another son, to produce another offspring.
Oh, interesting.
And so so when a person has a death fright conflict and you suddenly, there's a wild animal running at you, what do you need in that moment? You need more oxygen in your blood. And so the thing that we call lung cancer is the lung proliferating extra alveoli, so you can absorb more oxygen in that moment, so you can get out of that dangerous situation. And so when you see the meaning, that's the beauty of this map of understanding that the body doesn't do anything for no reason. There's not any dis-ease in the body that is intended for your demise. There's no such thing as autoimmune disease. The body would never attack itself. The body is only doing what is biologically programmed as necessary in order for you to survive this situation. Now, ideally, we wouldn't be going through these conflicts and reliving them every day and having, conflicts for a really, really long time. In nature, animals, they have a death fright, they almost get eaten, and then they get over it in an hour, get away. But, because of our cerebral cortex and our ability to, relive things and put ourselves in unnatural environments, we can have conflicts for years and years, which can develop into more, what we consider serious health situations. But even those, it still is your body doing what was intended. Even though, you might be having like a huge tumor in your colon, that's obviously not ideal. But what that indicates is that you had years of an indigestible morsel conflict, something you couldn't digest, and your body was stepping in to help you. That's where tumor has a function and a purpose. And so that is just kind of a little getting into what this map really is all about. It's all about meaningful adaptation to shocking life circumstances.
Got it. And how did he even discover these? I mean, I'm looking at that chart right behind you, and it just looks complex and in depth. How did he start correlating these things? I'm sure there might have been some type of like CT scans, as you mentioned. Is that how he do it? Did he use all of the
CT scan? He was a very intelligent doctor. He, had a history in inventing medical devices, and so he was very bright, very, and he also was had gone to school for theology. So he had like a lot of different interesting background, but the pieces started to come together. So he looked at the embryology. So everything. When you look at the 5 biological laws, he talks about the ontogenetic system. So ontogenetic is like the origination of this system, and looking at the embryology. So when a baby is formed, when the sperm and egg come together, the tissue starts to differentiate into 3 different layers. And so he looked at the embryological germ layer. Where does this, so the outside of your skin is a different tissue than the inside of your colon. Those are different tissue types. And so he looked at the tissue types, the histology, he correlated it to the brain level. And
wow.
And so that's how he began to see, okay, so the testicle is doing this and the lung is doing that. Okay, what are the tissue layers that this is made out of? Because every organ, it's actually really incredible when you look at the organs and how they're all interwoven. And so you'll see, the colon is endodermal tissue, but it also has musculature, and it also has blood supply, and it also has nerve supply. So it's all of these different tissue layers woven together into these organ systems controlled from specific areas of the brain. But when he looked at the brain scan, he'd see the conflict is here and not here. So that indicates that it has this specific theme of an indigestible morsel versus a conflict of the muscles, which would be feeling stuck, feeling frozen in fear, versus self-devaluation versus separation. And so everything is mapped out based on the embryological origin. And he also correlates it to the evolutionary development over time of when there were just simple organisms versus the most complex organism. Obviously, now we're the most complex organism, so we have every single layer. And when a baby is conceived, it goes through every single developmental process that causes a human to be a complete human. So it's really mind-blowing how, and there's lots of, I'd love to see all of his notes that he took along the way. All of it's in German. And so we don't have access, unfortunately, to all of his, as he's figuring it out notes. That's my dream one day, is for that to all get translated and for us to see the process as he's going through it. But now we have this complete map. And I'm sure there's still going to be things that are discovered as we actually put some money behind researching more within the system. But as of now, it has been suppressed. It hasn't been acknowledged by, conventional modern medicine, because if it was, they'd have to change everything. And they don't want to change everything.
Of course not. And then you lose a lot of money too, I bet. So how about children? We see a lot of children coming out straight out of the womb with, different, problems. Is that something that's related more so to the parents and the parents' inabilities or traumas kind of coming in with the child, and then the child embodies these things?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. So, the child, they are, they're just awash in their environment and in their experience. And their experience comes through the mother. So whatever the mother is going through, so even the moment of conception, if the child was unwanted, if there was some question whether or not we are going to keep this baby, that baby can get downloaded the feeling of my parents don't want me. And so that can be this fundamental feeling of self-devaluation. And so if a child very early develops leukemia, or they're like, oh, this child has this or that disease happening right out of the womb, that means that during the gestation, something shocked them, something they experienced, either a self-devaluation or, some type of conflict that caused their tissues to adapt in that way. Another thing is Dr. Hamer found with Down syndrome, it's actually a double hearing conflict. And this is really incredible, of too many loud noises. We're very used to, in our modern world, jackhammers and buzzsaw, doing construction next door, and using the really loud blender and the blower, and doing things like ultrasound and putting ultrasound waves into the actual uterus during the, while the baby is developing.
Yeah.
Dr. Hamer found that if there were two hearing conflict happening at the same time, that's what causes the manifestation of what we call Down syndrome. And it's wow, yes, during gestation, the baby can experience conflicts through the mother, through her, the mother may not have even had, a hearing conflict, but the child can experience it for itself because it's having an experience already as soon as conception and these sensory organs develop, the baby can have their own conflicts.
Wow. So there is a direct correlation to the baby's environment even before it's out of the womb.
Absolutely.
Wow, that is intense. How could mothers actually then do their best to kind of protect that? Because even I live in Los Angeles, so even I was trying to meditate outside this morning. It was so funny, and I put my little timer on, and then I didn't realize how busy and noisy it is. It's it's 8 a.m. here, or excuse me, 1 p.m. now, and the amount of noise was distracting me. So many things, cars, beeping noises. I couldn't imagine what a mother has to go through to just try to protect her child from not having any of these diseases or anything like that.
Yeah, well, one, you don't want to panic about it, because I know some people will hear certain things and be like, oh no, I'm doing everything wrong and my child's gonna, we are highly adaptable organisms. However, we do want to try to live as naturally and biologically as possible. Living in a city just isn't how our ancestors lived. And so our biological makeup has not adapted for all of, the bombardment, so if you find yourself and you're in that situation, just trust that, don't go above and beyond, like don't use the leaf blower when you're pregnant, like be much, like just take precautions, consider perhaps not doing compulsory ultrasounds during the pregnancy, because these things are, they're actually, even though they're considered completely, normal, of course, everybody does it, they can often cause more harm than good. And so when you educate yourself and study the biological laws, you'll just start to do more of what makes sense. And so that's how you protect yourself. That's how you protect your child, is by, paying attention to what's going on in your environment, and then also to your unresolved conflict. What's unfinished in your life? Because this is a thing too. Yes, if you have a conflict, so sometimes kids will develop rashes or problems with their mouth, their teeth. And so first we, look at, okay, did the child have a separation conflict? Did the child have a biting conflict? And then we also look, what did the mother experience? Do you have a bite conflict? Do you have a separation conflict? Is there something going on with you? Because a baby, it doesn't experience itself as different than the mother. It until it becomes self-aware and realizes, oh, you're separate from me. You're a different person. The baby literally thinks that it is the mother. And from ages 0 to 7, children are in a hypnotic state. Their brain waves are like in this theta brainwave pattern. And so they just kind of pick up on whatever it is you're dealing with, if the parents are fighting. And so that's why, understanding this map really emphasizes harmonious relationships. Where is there disharmony in my life? Where am I living out of alignment? Where am I putting myself in situations where there's a lot of conflict and chaos? And what do I need to do to make practical changes to get out of those situations so I can be more at peace and chill, so that I can, train my children and be in the vibration of peace and chill around my children, so that they don't have, increased conflict. And recognizing when was I shocked? So you learn, like when you learn the biological laws, you pay attention. Gosh, anytime you're compulsively thinking and your hands are cold and you've got, trouble sleeping all through the night, if you keep waking up at a certain time in the night, there's something unresolved. There's something for you to figure out, I need a solution to this problem.
And how about, because this sounds like more about psychology almost than anything than almost physiology, but where does the perceiving aspect come to it? Like I try to teach people to, something may happen to us, but it's the way we perceive it that gives it the conflict or the challenge. Is it also the way we perceive these things can cause, changes in the body, or where does that play into it?
Totally. So one thing to keep in mind with the 5 biological laws is these are biological conflicts. So they affect us, whether it kind of goes beyond psychology, it goes beyond the mind. Your psyche, so your biology can perceive a conflict 6 seconds before you even realize something happened. So the body is always perceiving, always paying attention. And so sometimes you'll have something and you'll be like, well, that wasn't, you may not psychologically perceive it as that big of a deal, but your biology did. Another example is so a person, this woman, she lost 3 or 4 family members. And you think the loss of those family members, that was the conflict. But it actually wasn't, because, these family members were old and it was expected. One of the, the hallmarks of a biological conflict is it was unexpected. Ooh, I didn't expect this to happen. I was shocked. I was caught off guard. I felt all alone in that moment. And so this girl, she lost several family members. That wasn't the conflict for her. But what was is that one of her uncles had this antique chest that he, I guess, she thought that she was getting it. And in his will, he gave it to her sister. And so in her mind, she had already digested. She already had a place in her house for it. She was expecting to get it. And then she didn't get it. And so this affects the pancreas. And so he developed pancreatic adaptations because of this situation with the chest. And so, she came to Dr. Hamer. She's like, I've been, diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And, as he's helping her to figure it out, they found out it was about the chest. And, she ended up paying her sister for the chest and kind of doing an exchange, getting it back to resolve her conflict. And so that's where, again, there are things we think might be the conflict, but we always have to go back to what is the biology. Now, that being said, there's also, how we're looking at the situation, because how I see something determines also whether or not it is a conflict for me. So something that used to be a huge conflict for me, which changed my perception, really, really helped, was I had a correlation. So I learned about seed oils and bad food.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime I would eat it, I would go, oh, this is something bad. I would be surprised, or I'd read a label and I'd be like, I didn't know that there was, soybean oil in this. And I would be really surprised by it. And I would get a breakout. I'd get acne. Couldn't eat bad oils because I learned these oils are bad for you. If I find out it's in something, or if I realize, I ate this and there's something I shouldn't be eating in it, I would get an acne breakout. And so I was convinced for years it was the bad oils caused acne. But sometimes I would be eating, totally clean, and I'd get a breakout. And so that didn't make total sense. So I had this correlation. But then when I learned Dr. Hamer's description that acne comes from the deeper layer of skin, the corium skin, controlled from the cerebellum, and it's a conflict of feeling attacked or feeling dirtied or soiled or defiled in some way. And I was like, oh my goodness, I would feel gross every time I ate something that had a bad oil in it. And when I realized it, that created this conflict. And so it became a trap. So I wouldn't even have to think about it. My body flagged the oil as bad. And so anytime I would have that, some type of seed oil, my body would register, this is bad for me, and it would create a breakout, because that's the biological adaptation that occurs when you feel attacked or feel soiled. And so once I shifted that perspective, once I was like, this is fine. Like before I knew about seed oils, I don't go out of my way to eat them, but I don't make it a problem if I happen to be out at a restaurant or eating something that I wouldn't, isn't in my normal diet. I just don't make it a problem, because it's the resistance. It's my perception that, this is bad for me. That's what created and caused this ongoing track where, certain foods would cause an acne breakout for me. So that's an example of how, yes, it's biological, but we can shift the way we see and experience a situation to make it not a conflict for us anymore.
Oh, wow. That's pretty interesting. So is there room for dysfunction in this paradigm of German new medicine? Meaning, I've been studying and learning about, exactly how you said, the dysfunctions that come from seed oils and EMFs and all these different things that in our modern world cause disease. At least that's the way I've been looking at it. In this paradigm, is there that?
So there, as far as exceptions to the biological laws, we've got injury, true poisoning, and malnutrition, or deficiencies. And so you can have a deficiency, of a certain nutrient, and if you don't have that building block component, that can create some type of issue in the body. You can have an injury that's, not a conflict, and it's just an injury and the body needs to repair it. A true poisoning, and so this is where it gets kind of interesting, the difference between, and I believe this for many years, the toxin theory, that toxins are in everything, or on, I'm breathing them in, I'm eating them, I'm getting exposed to them, and that toxin is just going to detox and shed through my body. I used to believe that, but now that doesn't make as much sense to me. Poisoning thing, to me, what makes the most sense is that it's an immediate reaction. If you swallow Drano, your body is going to get it out. Your body is going to perceive this doesn't belong here. That's a true poisoning. You're going to expel it in any way possible. And so it's something that is an immediate reaction to something that doesn't belong in the body. Now, the accumulation of this and that toxin over time, I think that it does add to, the overall depletion of vital energy, so the body, is having to amplify its ability to adapt itself to the, whatever toxins are present in your environment. But that is kind of normal. The body is very adaptable. It can adapt to all sorts of different things. And so that's how I choose to perceive, the bombardment of all sorts of external things, is that my body's really good at adapting. Again, I'm not going to go out of my way to put a bunch of toxins in, to be in, areas and environments where there's, a lot of pollution or EMF or whatever, but I'm not going to make it a problem for me. And so that is where I think that a lot of people have gotten into this idea of this is causing, EMF and all these external things are causing my sickness. I find that overlooks the conflict. And so if you still believe that, that's fine. But also look at what the symptom is through the G&M lens. So if you're not ready to totally kind of shift over and no longer believe that these external things are controlling whether or not you have symptoms, also look at what does GNM say? Because, I know people that are like, oh, I've got a skin rash. It's just a detox. My body's just detoxing. But if you don't look at the separation conflict component, who do you want to separate from? When did this start? Who is this? Who is involved in you developing this rash? You're kind of missing a piece. And so you're just looking at the external, because it is still rooted in materialism. When you look at a physical toxin being the cause of my problem, that's still materialistic, just like thinking a germ is the cause of your problem.
Right. Okay, so can you repeat those again? It was poisoning, physical injury, and then what was the last one?
Nutrition, or like deficiency of nutrition.
Got it. I think I see that one more often, where a lot of the foods, because I'm an exercise coach and nutritionist, so I see a lot of people just kind of in the processed food cycle of not getting enough nutrients and over-consuming food, which may also be leading to, insults of toxicity with with glyphosate and all the pesticides that we put in our chemicals. Okay, that's very interesting. I had a question about immune reactions. Now, this is something that's very common, and I have a acupuncturist that I work with, and he says that, typically when people get like a fever, sometimes the body overreacts. And then, that kind of stuck in my head for a very long time. Like, oh, the body sometimes, I guess, like reacts and then overreacts. Okay, so then that, I guess, is how you explain autoimmune disorder. It reacted, but then it was a perpetual overreaction. But then it also didn't make sense to me of like, why would the body continuously, destroy itself? But German New Medicine actually seems to have a better explanation for autoimmune disorder. Could we go into that?
Totally. Yeah. So the idea that the body would just attack itself for no reason,
right.
It's like, how does that make any biological sense? So if we're, if every organism has this ability to just attack itself arbitrarily, we probably wouldn't have made it this far.
Right.
But there are laws that govern the inflammatory response. And so this is the law of two phases, is the law that shows us however long the conflict was. So if so you've got your normal day-night rhythm. It's called normotonia. This is our normal balanced homeostasis. And when you have a conflict, you shift into adaptation phase. So this is when you're stressed. This is when you're not sleeping. This is when your hands and feet are cold and you're compulsively thinking. This is when your tissues are changing. And so something that, is considered like an autoimmune disease is like Hashimoto's and the thyroid. And that has to do with the thyroid ducts. And so this is a feeling of I'm powerless. There's nothing I can do, or danger is heading at me and I'm powerless to do anything about it, but I feel like I need to do something about it. So you're conflicted. You're feeling powerless, but you're like, I need to do something. And so this causes adaptation in the thyroid ducts. So the thyroid ducts will widen. And so the body is going through this adaptation process for as long as the conflict is active. And then when you go into the healing phase, and the body has to repair whatever tissue was adapted during the conflict active phase. And so this is when we have inflammation. This is when we have swelling. This is when we have, maybe changes to your lab values during that healing phase when your body is going through the tissue restoration. And depending on which tissue, whether it's the thyroid ducts or the thyroid gland or, which tissues are adapting and what numbers show up on the paper, they say, oh, well, your numbers are really high or your numbers are really low. And this means that your body is doing, this bad inflammatory process. But all it means is you were having a conflict and then your tissues are now in the repair phase. And if you let that just finish, if you had the conflict, if it was like a one cycle thing, conflict, resolution, tissue healing phase, you're going to get back to, normal balance pretty soon. If the conflict was 3 days long, you're going to be in healing for, about 3 days, and then the whole program will complete. But if you're in conflict for a really long time, or you start, resolving it, and then you reactivate it in the situation, you keep ripping off the scab. And so when someone has like some type of autoimmune inflammatory condition that just seems like I'm always inflamed, I'm always having this issue, it seems like my body is just kind of on overdrive, making a mistake, having a fever, the body only does what makes sense. The body works off this like biological mathematics. And so it truly, like Dr. Hamer, it's a science that the body will only do. If you had a conflict of a certain length and intensity, the healing is going to be that equivalent length and intensity. It's simply, it's mathematical. It's biologically programmed in, which is what is so cool about this system, is there's no guessing. This is, if a person, let's say that they've been diagnosed with leukemia. Leukemia is a healing phase symptom. That person had a self-devaluation conflict, and they lost bone tissue. They lost the tissue that produces, they were losing blood cells. They were in an anemic state during the conflict active phase, anemia, leukopenia, and then during the healing phase, oh, your white blood cells are really, really high. And they say, oh, this is scary. This is bad. But if someone who knows this math, they'd say, congratulations, you've resolved a self-devaluation conflict. Now the key is to not go back into the conflict and allow your body rest, because this is often when a person's diagnosed with leukemia, they're very tired,
right,
have no energy, they can't get up and do anything. So they're starting to get scared, going back to what you said at the beginning. When you understand this is a very specific mathematical, biological process that the body is programmed to do when you have a specific type of life event, if we can map out how many months, when did you get that notice that you might, lose your house? Oh, self-devaluation. Oh, I'm such a loser. How could I put myself in this situation? So you get the notice and you're like freaked out about it and you're devaluing yourself and you're feeling really bad, and you're maybe working really hard to try to like make the money you need to, solve this problem. And that, maybe takes you 3 months to get out of debt, to be able to pay off whatever you need. And then after 3 months, you make the payment. You're like, all right, I did it. I'm going to be okay. I'll be able to keep my house. Huge sigh of relief. And then you start getting really tired. And then you're like, I don't feel right. I feel really like something's wrong with me. And your friends and family are like, hey, yeah, you look bad. You look really pale. And what's going on with you? And then you go to get a blood test. And then they say, sorry, you've got leukemia. And they're like, and they get so scared because they don't know. They don't recognize. They didn't remember the 3 months that they were losing sleep and beating themselves up and devaluing themselves and feeling like such a worthless piece of crap for 3 months. And then they resolved it, started feeling better about themselves, and then the tissues are going to start repairing. But a person who knows this, one, they may never even go in and get the blood test because they know what the symptoms indicate. But if they did, they say, okay, this confirms what I thought. I knew I was devaluing myself. I know that this is going to take about 3 months for me to heal this. And so I'm not rushing it. I'm not, panicking. I'm not going to have another conflict about this. I'm just going to, rest and chill and do the best I can to not get back into that situation. And so that's how profound this knowledge is, that if you don't know it, and truly we are all, every person that doesn't know this is at a huge liability, because you're one symptom away from, Googling or going to the doctor and having a test and then them telling you something so terrifying. And then you get into this vicious cycle, downward spiral of fear and more diagnosis and more fear. And it's like, it's no wonder that we're in the health situation we're in, because everyone is, they don't understand how their body works.
Yeah. And as you speak, I'm also thinking like, I feel like everybody, maybe including myself, is always in a state of some kind of stress of like, I got to get here, or I got to do this, or I can't believe this happened to me. And I'm like, as you're talking, I'm like, holy smokes, I feel like maybe everybody's being traumatized at all times. That's kind of scary.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the modern world. Everything about it is unbiological. I mean, from the way that we work to the way that we have children to the way that we raise those children. I mean, most people are so disconnected, dysregulated. They were born to parents who had to work, who put them in daycare, who gave them formula, you know what I mean? Like they didn't even biological. So many people just have this underlying, existence fear. They're just like, I don't even know why I'm here because, and again, were their parents ready to conceive them? The conscious conception piece is a very big deal. If you are, not ready to have a child and you have one, or you're like having questions about it, and that child gets kind of programmed with this, do I even belong here? Am I even, and so stuff runs very, very deep. And yeah, most people are running, 8 to 10 biological programs and have like all these conflict themes that are kind of like your pet conflicts that you continually go back to, whether it's, separation or indigestible morsels, self-devaluation, bite conflicts. Like, what's your thing? Do you have vision problems? Is it teeth problems? Is it ear problems? Is it, the sexual type of conflicts? If you're having, outbreaks and herpes and UTIs. It's like, okay, they all have different threads, different themes, different life situations that bring them on. But, your health history tells a story of everything you went through. Like if you had asthma as a kid, we know that you were scared. You had a scare fright, territorial fear, something scary was going on in your home. If you had, chronic digestive problems or something you could not digest, something that made you angry, something you couldn't process. And so every symptom tells us so much about your psyche, your experience, and this map can help us to, unearth, figure out, pull the thread. What is this really about? And is there can I find a resolution to this? Can I change my experience? A conflict is resolved when it can't happen again. When you look at it, this is why, kids, for example, will grow out of certain symptoms like asthma. Let's say, a kid who had a territorial fear conflict, because they got grounded and they were afraid, of their parents yelling at them and, doors slamming. They had a scare fright, so they had this asthma. And when they, turned 18 and they went to college and they're out there, they're like, oh, I don't have to be afraid of my parents grounding me anymore, or that yelling, or, getting my stuff taken away. It's like, I'm an adult now. That's just a natural resolution. You're like, yeah, I used to have asthma, but I just don't anymore. It's like, well, that's why, because you're not at that phase of life anymore. That conflict can't happen again. So it's and it's so unique, so there's not like this is how you resolve every conflict. So that's how some people will get a little kind of like hung up on the GNM thing, and they'll be like, well, I don't know how to solve it. It's like, well, this does take, a depth of self-knowledge, self-awareness, paying attention, getting yourself in this very curious dot connecting mode where you can see how do you react to stuff now? Because a lot of conflicts, we just forget them. And they happened very early on. And we do have to get to like, when was the first time you felt this feeling? When was the first time you felt rejected? When was the first time that you were, terrified or shocked? Because that's when the program turned on. And that's the thing that we need to, get to the place of complete relief about, the conflict, like it's resolved when it can't happen again, or you can laugh about it. And so that's where the perception change. If I can laugh about what happened, if I can see how silly it was and how limited it was and how, it's no longer affecting me in my life, that also can cause, one of my mentors uses this phrase, the stone to drop from your soul. That's the resolution. That is, I'm no longer scared, upset, worried, uncertain about this situation. I've resolved it.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. So the most common disease people are dying from is like coronary artery disease. And I'm trying to help the most people as possible. So let's say if that's like the number one killer and they want to see you and they want to just get educated and not freak out. How does your practice look if you're helping somebody with that type of ailment?
Well, yeah, we'd always have to see, what are the symptoms? How does it show up for you? The coronary arteries are controlled from the cerebral cortex, and the conflict is a territorial loss conflict. And so we have to look at, when did you lose your territory? What do you consider your territory? It's different for men and women because men, right-handed men, when they have a territorial loss conflict, this has to do, with their work, their job. Like a lot of men, if a man like dies of a coronary heart attack, it's actually the heart attack comes after the conflict's been resolved. So this is a very interesting situation where, let's say that your whole career, you've been in this territorial fight for your position in your company, and so you're always in this territory conflict. And then you retire and you're like, well, I don't ever have to worry about this again. I've resolved this conflict. But if you've been in that conflict for, 30 years, there's a time limit for every biological program. And there are certain programs, after a certain period of time, you actually don't want to resolve it. Dr. Hamer says you should stay, like if you retire from your work, you should stay on as the night watchman so that you can keep, some territory conflict going. So that is what causes adaptations is a territorial conflict for men or a sexual conflict for women, which affects the coronary veins, which leads to a pulmonary embolism during the healing phase. And so those are two of the more kind of complex areas to understand as far as resolution goes. And so it's territory loss and how you perceive your territory and Often this happens very early for boys. They will lose their territory because they've got an older brother, or they're being bullied at school. And so, yeah, there's a lot to that one.
Wow. And then do you play more of like a psychologist role because you're digging deep into the person's history and the perceiving? Like, are you playing more of a psychologist role in your practice?
Well, so what I do is I don't consider it like that. I do education. So I want to teach the person about how their biology works and then ask questions, and so, you could categorize it in that way. I consider it more, consulting, coaching of, this is what the map of GNM says. Let's look at your life experiences and let's try to connect the dots and find solutions, and so that is what's necessary. So for a person, if a child is having a symptom, I'll work with the parents. I don't work directly with children. I work with the parents so that they can understand, and then I have the parent work with the child because, you're going to be your child's best coach. Children don't want to go to see someone about theirs. They just want to have fun. And so the parents, it's kind of on you to connect these dots. But I, get all sorts of wonderful messages from people. A mother messaged me and said, oh, my daughter, she was at school and someone was sitting next to her and like threw up on the floor. And so, and then the little girl broke out in hives for the next 3 days. And she said it was when, the next day when she was coloring, she broke out on terrible hives, mostly by her feet, which is where the barf landed. And so when the mom asked the little girl, like, how did you feel when, the girl at school threw up on the floor near you? She said, I just wanted to get away from it. And so hives, it's a separation conflict of the outer skin. And so she wanted to separate. She wanted to get away from the barf, from the girl, from the situation. And what's interesting is she had seen like they were going to go away, and then the little girl was coloring. And so she was coloring when the barf situation originally happened. And so it became a trap for her. So the next day when she was coloring, it had seemed like it was going to go away, but it flared back up again. Because her biology remembered we were coloring when this situation happened that we wanted to get away from. So the body goes ahead and activates the biological program of the skin separation. So I suggested to her to have her draw a picture. So it's about coloring is the track. Have her draw a picture of the whole situation of the girl barfing on the ground and her wanting to get away from it. Because, if you can get her to laugh about it, if you can help her to like find it funny, like how silly, like to draw a coloring crayon picture of someone barfing, like that's just going to be funny. And so that could be the resolution, because one, you have to process it, because in that moment she felt all alone. You want her to be able to talk about it, to share how she felt in that moment, and can we find this funny? And so after she did that, everything cleared up, and so she was able to color without having the hives anymore. And so this is just an example of a way that you can help a child through something by understanding, because otherwise if a parent's like, oh no, my child has hives now, and you're going to have to, you take them to the dermatologist, you take them to the pediatrician, and they give you steroids, or they give you, all sorts of things that is unnecessary. When you understand what happened to her, how she felt shocked in that moment, how she felt like she needed to get away, and how she can kind of bring a resolution around the whole thing. And so that's like kind of what the work is being creative, especially when you're dealing with children and dealing with yourself as well. We have to be creative, and, how can you, resolve this self-devaluation conflict, this identity conflict, this height conflict? Is it something you need to practically do? That's always the first line, is a practical change. And then we look at changing perception, changing the way that you're thinking about the situation.
Very nice. That's such an interesting story that like now the coloring, the body remembered. That's pretty unique. With diseases that are, or quote unquote diseases that are common, like Alzheimer's and all these things, is there like a collective trauma? I studied Jung, and he talked a lot about like the collective unconscious being very tied to all people. Is there some type of collective trauma as well that can potentially cause these very rapid quote unquote diseases?
Well, I always looked at the individual, so yes, there could be some collective thing going on, but what's most interesting is the individual, because it doesn't show up in everybody. So even if there is a collective whatever, well, it's only showing up in some people and not every single person, and so with Alzheimer's, we have to look at double brainstem constellation. So feeling isolated, feeling abandoned, feeling kicked out, feeling left out. can create this sense of disorientation. Separation conflicts cause dementia, so not being able to remember things. And so, it always makes sense. When you look at the person's life story, when you look at what happened to them prior to the onset of their symptoms, you can put the dots together, and there's always a way in which it makes biological sense that this individual is dealing with what they're dealing with. Now, ancestrally and what goes on in family lines and collective, that's all very interesting too, but it had to get triggered within that one individual for it to show up in their experience.
Got it. And just because you said the word ancestor, and in my head, I'm thinking of like our ancestors have dealt with, all types of traumas, of loss, of separation, of devaluation. So is there potentially a solution for everything almost, because our ancestors have gone through almost everything?
Well, yeah, I mean, that there is a template for that. It's like, that we are proof of the adaptability to life circumstances. We're the proof that we can overcome and persist beyond. But the thing is paying attention to what keeps happening in my family, because if a storyline isn't complete, and so there's this really interesting kind of avenue within, so they use the basis of the 5 biological laws, but it's called recall healing, developed by one of my mentors, Gilbert Reynaud. And he looks at, the 9 months before you were conceived, that moment of conception, the 9 months of your gestation, your first year of life. He also looks at your birth order within your family tree. Because if somebody in your family tree has an unfinished business, you are going to see themes, in your life to whichever ancestors that you're connected to, and so if a woman is dealing with, miscarriages or betrayal in relationship, it's like, okay, maybe this didn't start with you. Maybe this is something that somebody in your family tree didn't ever resolve. And so it could kind of, the apple falls and it's fallen to me. So it's on me to resolve this for the family tree, for my ancestors, through awareness, and it's through kind of like telling the story. Because isolation, if somebody wasn't able to express their problem, if they weren't able to share what was overwhelming to them, they just suppressed it, that does energetically kind of just stay in the family system. And that by bringing a voice to it, bringing kind of an intentional desire to release it, Dr. Hamer, he wasn't too into the ancestral component. He was more about like the biological, because, that's one of the things where it's a little more hard to be systematic and scientific and mathematical when it comes to like looking at ancestry. And so this is like a different track. But I have personally found it very interesting, very, very helpful. But yeah, just to kind of put that in there, the Dr. Hamer was more about like looking at the individual, what sparked it within them. But, the branching out to the ancestral stuff, I've just found it very enriching and interesting and helpful.
Very nice. What was the name of that doctor again?
Well, it's Recall Healing. Recallhealing.com, and Gilbert Reynaud is his name.
Gilbert Reynaud. Is he French?
French-Canadian.
French-Canadian. Very nice. So in this field or in this perspective of German new medicine, where have you seen in your practice is the most effective area? So like for me, I'm always just trying to see what works and then just trying to see what things are most effective, even with conventional medicine. Like if I were to break my arm, I'd go to the nearest, Kaiser or whatever and just wrap it up and have them take care of that. So I'm always just trying not to be biased and just trying to see where can these tools best work, and where have you seen in your experience and practice that this perspective is like killer, it's spot on?
Well, I mean, it's spot on for everything as far as health symptoms go. And so the most important thing is to learn the map for yourself. You need this knowledge with you. You know what I mean? Like to outsource and to kind of go to someone else to find it out after the fact is one thing, but to know in your bones that when you're sneezing, coughing, barfing, having, blood in the toilet, it's like, oh, I know exactly why this has happened. There's nothing that can beat that. There's nothing that can beat the calm confidence that comes with knowing how your own body works. And so that's what I encourage people all the time. I teach a weekly class called Language of Adaptation, and it's all about you learning how your body works. So if your hair starts falling off, oh, I had a separation conflict. Like I know exactly where to go. Even if I can't identify it yet, I at least know where it is on the map, and what I can do to start like looking into it. So that's the first thing, is learning the biological map. The next thing, what I use with the people that I work with is awareness. Like, you have to develop the ability to pay attention to how you react to things. Because if it goes by unnoticed, most people can't see the connections because they're so immersed in their moment-to-moment experience. They're not observing themselves. They're not paying attention. And so that's what I do is I teach another course called Awareness School, which is all about developing this muscle, this ability to see yourself as you're reacting to life so that you can notice, wow, someone who recently took Awareness School expressed that, she didn't realize, she was aware of like the concept of like the self-devaluation conflict, but until she did Awareness School and kind of going through this awareness challenge that we do, she was able to see, I'm devaluing myself all day long. And she didn't even know it. She didn't even realize until she did the awareness work, I'm constantly devaluing myself all of the time. And so it's so important to be able to see that, to connect that dot, so that now with the map, you can see, okay, this is what the map says about what this conflict is. This is what's going on inside of me. So I can see when I want to push someone away, when I'm like, I just need to get away from this person, or they need to get away from me. And you can see the relationship to, I wish I never had to deal with you, and the eczema or the psoriasis that's on your elbow. You're like, oh, I can see why it shows up on the outside of my elbow because I want to push. I just want to elbow life. Or if it's on the inside of your elbow, if you're always like missing someone and you're like, oh, I just want to hold you and hug you and I miss you so much and I just want that contact. You're like, oh, I'm having that compulsive thought about wanting to hold you. And oh, that's the inside of the elbow because the inside is about holding, the outside is about pushing away. And it's like, the symbolism of where it shows up on the body, paying attention to these micro reactions that normally you're just not even seeing. When you can pull that thread and make that connection, you're like, oh, I see how this is continuing in my life. I need to find a solution because the thought or the thread that lead you to what the conflict is really about. So the people, you don't need to be afraid of your thoughts. Your thoughts are simply a reflection of the unresolved conflict. You use the thoughts as a thread that you pull to get to, I need to, quit my job and move back with my partner because I just miss them so much. That's what's causing this rash. Or I need to leave this job and, because this is what's causing this. I need to separate from this person. That's why I keep having this problem. And so figure out what it's about, and then you enact a solution. That's how you practically kind of bring this into your life and make it usable.
Wow, this is like real preventative medicine. And like you gotta know it before then to actually really prevent literally anything from happening, because you re-traumatize yourself essentially, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful. Well, where do you stand with like, since you are a doctor, with like the COVID type of situation where it kind of took over the whole world, and there's obviously a lot of things that are not told, are told, and I just want to know your perspective, especially having this different perspective that I'm even used to.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't take over the world. All it was on the news all the time, and so barely anybody that I knew ever, like during that 3 years, ever had any symptoms at all. So it was overblown. It was a propaganda show. That's all it was. And respiratory symptoms is a territorial fear conflict. So a cough and a fever, the scary new thing. It's a new thing called COVID. Like, I just cringe every time I see someone says, well, I have COVID like today, like, just over this 2023 Christmas. Oh, well, the whole family has COVID. COVID is not a thing. It's not a thing. What are your symptoms? Oh, we all have coughs and fevers. Okay, the family experienced a territorial fear conflict. They experienced some type of threat in their territory. They didn't feel safe. Their bronchial mucosa adapted, and now it's in the healing phase. That's what it is. If you have if you also have a stuffy nose, you had a stink conflict. You said, this stinks and I'm afraid. If you also have a sore throat, you have a can't swallow conflict, stink conflict, territorial fear. So the symptoms tell us what the person experienced. And so the whole absolute ridiculous scamdemic charade was all about amplifying fear and selling an injection. And that's what it was all about. I mean, still is about. It never was about some new form of an illness. It's always the same. We just have to look at the symptoms that the person is expressing and trace it back to an experience in their life of what happened that caused them to feel afraid. And it's a perfect self-fulfilling prophecy, because as soon as you get people afraid of a scary new particle, they feel fear in their territory. They don't know, are you safe? Did you get the shot? Are you wearing a mask? Was this doorknob disinfected? Was this clean? Was that, like you're afraid environment. And that is this self-fulfilling prophecy of like, I'm afraid that causes my bronchial mucosa to widen. And then I get home and I finally feel safe and I go, oh gosh, I'm coughing. Oh no, I must have got it. Somebody must not have been vaccinated. Someone must not have been wearing a mask. That little particle must know you felt a specific experience of fear and uncertainty in your territory, and it caused a specific adaptation in your body. And it's nothing novel, it's nothing new, it's nothing scary. But if you think it's scary and novel and new, and you go to the doctor and they say you have to quarantine, you can't be around your family, and you might get hospitalized, that's the absolute worst thing you can do, because now you're feeling isolated. And anytime, and this is how this got blown into such a huge, terrible thing with people, oh, the hospital wards are just full of these people and are being intubated and all, what they did was they freaked people out.
Oh, yeah.
And then they people out about having symptoms, and then they isolated them from their families, which caused them to hold on to water. So that's another biological program of the kidney collecting tubules. When you feel isolated, abandoned, kicked out, rejected, like a refugee when you're not at home, your kidney collecting tubules shut off and no fluid leaves your system. And the fluid goes to any area that's in healing. So it goes to the lungs, and it makes it even harder to breathe. And they say, oh, we have to keep these people isolated away from their families. And then they die in fear because of the fear that was sold to them on the TV about, stay away from people, 6 feet, da-da-da-da. And you have to isolate. Both of those things together, lung adaptation and fluid retention, can lead to getting to the point where you can't breathe, And so it's like, the last 3 years has been wonderful because tons of people have learned about, this other model simply because they're like, this doesn't make sense, but so many people are still just like brainwashed and still believe the old model.
Yeah, that is so interesting because I remember when it first happened, I just moved out into my own place. So I was completely alone, and the whole world was like going crazy and shutting down and everything. And I remember like a couple times like freaked out a little bit, and I would start to be like, I'm like, oh man, like, I'm like, damn, did I get it? And like, I'm like, dude, relax. And like, I started to like just try to like erase my panic, and then like it would go away. But it's funny how I know my body, and it would just like, when I freaked out, I'd have like these teeny weeny symptoms, and I could see the snowball starting to want to form, and then I would just kind of shut it off and it'll go away. So it's just funny how these things that we perceive can actually just change our physiology like in an instant.
Yeah, you can adapt to something. You can have like a really just quick, like conflict, fear, and then have one little cough, But if you stay in it for longer and longer, if you were, in it for an hour, in it for a few days, feeling really worried, people will go, to family gatherings, and they're like, and then they leave the family gathering, they breathe a sigh of relief, and then they start coughing. And it's like, you were in fear. You were in fear while you were there the whole time, and now you're in healing. A lot of people, kids, when they go to family holiday parties and they come home and they're, and they're quote sick. Oh, we caught it from someone. No, you were in a different foreign environment. Maybe there are people there the kids had never met before. And so always pull the thread. It's never about a germ that jumps from one person to another. If it was about germs jumping from one person to another, this is actually a quote from V.J. Palmer. He's the founder of chiropractic, that if the germ theory were true, no one would be alive to believe it. Because if germs actually made people sick, everybody would have them and everyone would be dead. And so we know that is not how it works. And it is about individual experience, something that goes on with one person that didn't go on with another. Someone else didn't get symptoms and someone did. Someone had a conflict and someone didn't.
Wow, that's beautiful. I don't know if you've seen in the news lately that like the World Economic Forum is it the WHO, the World Health Organization, is like prepping for another pandemic. Have you seen that? Like, it's like they call it Disease X or something like that. But in this perspective, to anybody who's, listening here, how could they better protect themselves? Because it seems like, it's very hard to believe, and it's unbelievable that people would have such nefarious and evil plans for whatever reason. How could they better, protect themselves in a world where, people seem to want to like give them illnesses?
Well, yeah, they do want to reduce the population. It's kind of, it kind of makes sense from their perspective. They think that there's too many people, and it's like, okay, so we'll create all of this fear. We'll give these. It's just, yes, I do think that there is some behind the scenes weirdness happening. But, a person who's unafraid, a person who knows this map is no longer vulnerable to disease X. You're no longer vulnerable to some scary, mysterious pandemic that's on the next horizon, because we know where a fever comes from, where a cough comes from, where a stuffy nose comes from, where all of these symptoms come from. You've seen it in your own experience. You've connected those dots before. You're not afraid. You're not concerned. And so you're not even aware of things like that because you're focused on real life. You're returning to a natural order. You're probably out in nature, growing your own food and taking care of your own chickens or whatever. Like, you're just not concerned with that. That's really the key, is make your life so that you're not vulnerable to and not interested in what some, mystery organization is predicting that is going to happen. That's believing that your power lies outside of you, and what the WHO or the WEF or the W whoever is going to be doing, or what their nefarious motives might be. Are you that not in control of your life that they're going to determine your outcomes? That's either true or it isn't. And it's true for a lot of people. Their outcomes are determined by what's on the news. What is disease X? Because they are not in their own power. They are kind of zombies. They're not awake to the reality that their experience comes from them. Their health comes from them. It doesn't come from other people. It doesn't come from germs. It doesn't come outside of me. And so, not everyone's going to wake up to that. Some people are fine being kind of slaves to the system. And some people are going to wake up and have woken up. And, for those who haven't, that's kind of interesting. Like, will they ever? I don't know. Will they find this podcast and be intrigued and, completely overhaul their belief system? Maybe, it's definitely possible. But the only way to protect yourself from gobbledygook made up diseases is to know exactly how your tissues function.
Yeah. Beautiful. And we're going to wrap up now, but where could people learn about this? I feel like the most important thing is learning. I know you teach some courses, right? Or coaching as well?
Yeah. My YouTube channel is a great place to just kind of dip your toe in. I've got a carousel of 11 different tutorials on various organs, overview. And so I would start there. And then, if you want to study for yourself, there's a great bundle. If you go to my website, drmelissasell.com, you go to the blog and the Getting Started link, there's a bunch of books, there's courses, there's stuff that you can study. I teach a weekly class that is, it's for people who are getting started or diving deeper or have been studying it for a while and just want a forum, a place to ask questions and kind of be involved in a conversation. And so that is every Monday. But yeah, all the links and resources to books and stuff, you can find at that link in my.
Oh, perfect. I love that. And should they start with that map, or is it helpful to just start maybe with the YouTube videos first and just try to understand the YouTube videos and then maybe look at the map at the same time? Or
yeah, you can get actually this chart was just recently edited and reprinted. So it had been out of stock for a long time. And so you can find the link to that as well on that blog. But this can be a little overwhelming because it's a lot of terminology, endoderm, ectoderm, mesoderm, brain, cerebellum. And if you're not familiar with that, it would be good to kind of just, if this is interesting to you, watch the YouTube videos and then, just trust that you're going to learn the terminology as you go along. Maybe you'll get the map. But yeah, anything that you can do to kind of pull this, if you're coming across this information, it's intended for you to dive deeper with it. This is your birthright to know how your body functions. This is ancient wisdom. This isn't it's called German new medicine, but it isn't new. This is the ancient old origins of how everything has always functioned. And so if you've ever healed from something, you've healed through these biological laws, whether or not you were aware of it.
Wow. That's beautiful. Is there ancient scriptures on this at all, or Ayurvedic stuff also?
If you look at all, any of the Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, they all kind of hint at very similar themes, but Dr. Hamer is the first to put it in this, medical, to kind of bring in the modern medical understanding of, tissues and embryology and all of that and the brain regions with the specifics of how it manifests through the psyche. And the psyche is the soul. Dr. Hamer's first book is Psyche, or cancer, disease of the soul. So it's something in your soul, in your psyche. And so that has been, that's what's referenced in the, religious and spiritual texts, is about the diseases being in the soul. And that really is, when you have a conflict in your psyche, it causes adaptations, not a disease as in something going wrong, but an adaptation for the body to survive this thing that's unresolved. And when you resolve the conflict in the soul, the body goes back to its normal status.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for giving us your time. This has been so informative. And for everyone watching, you have to learn this before you have a conflict. So please check out Melissa's stuff on your blog, right? Or on your, in the blog. Perfect.
Yep.
Perfect.
drmelissasell.com. Click on the blog. Getting started is the entry.
The getting started. Perfect. All right. Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye. If you believe more constructive information like this should be out there for people to know, please leave a like on this video. And if you're a person who's into self-development in all aspects of their life, please subscribe, because that is what we do here at Good Demand. Keep demanding good things. And if you haven't bought a pair of Good Night Blue Blockers and you use a phone at night or an iPad or TV at night, please consider buying a pair of these. They're beautiful and they work so well and they help support our growth.